let's begin with prayer. Lord, thank you for the opportunity to be here to hear your word. May we all listen carefully to what you have to say, and may we share with one another the points that are important as far as the study we have is concerned. We ask this in your name. Amen. We only had 2 people last week, so I guess I got to go through.
We're way ahead.
So, this is the spring Bible study on the book of Ruth. Actually, we're all going to get up now and recite all the books of the Bible, so we'll figure out where the book of Ruth sits. We learned last week that Dave will not read anything anymore with any names in it. So, the book of Ruth is included for reasons we will soon discover. But basically, the author is unknown. Okay, it's out there somewhere. There are a whole lot of people trying to figure it out. They think the prophet Samuel may have written this, but they're not sure. The historical setting was at the time of the judges. That's between 1500 and 1000 BC. But the book itself was written after David took the throne, so it must have been written years after the events occurred. The important point is it was at the time of the judges, which was not a very, very good time for the Israelites. They had very little control over where they lived, and there was a lot of lawlessness going on, and basically it was because of the time of the judges that the Israel cried for a king. So structure is divided into 2 parts. Ruth's love is demonstrated and Ruth's love is rewarded. That's the whole book. It's one of 2 that are about a woman. Who's the other one?
Esther. Remember
Esther.
Remember Esther?
Yeah, there are about 8,000 Esters in my family. There are about 8,000 Esters in my family because of that. My great-grandmother was Esther. One of my Aunt Libby's sister was Esther. My mother's sister was Esther May. My grandmother Lena's sister was Esther. So we got a lot of Esthers running around.
My mother was Esther.
Yeah. Now, my sister's name was Ruth. And what I cannot understand is why in America, when you name somebody Ruth, it's usually Ruth Ann. Just like it's usually, if you name a child Barbara, it's Barbara Jean. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, my friend just passed away, Renee. That's what hers was, Barbara Jean.
So first of all, you have to understand the Israelites versus the Moabites. Both of these areas of the world will come up in the discussion. The Israelites considered themselves to be God's chosen people. There is no doubt about that. After all, God led them out of Egypt and gave them the promised land. And the Moabites were believed to have descended from Lot. Okay, who was Lot?
Noah's. Wasn't it Noah's?
Yeah, Lot was involved with one of the great events in the history of the Bible, and that was Sodom and Gomorrah. Yes.
That's all I remember.
So Lot and his people were kind of out there, and supposedly Lot and his daughter gave birth to Moab, and that's who the area of Moab was named after.
Didn't they come from Noah's lot and line?
Yeah,
okay.
they did. The Moabites were pagans, and there was animosity between the Moabites and the Israelites. That is a fact. And it was a terrible famine that led Naomi, which is one of the characters in the story, and her family to relocate from Bethlehem to Moab. Otherwise, they would have never done it. Now, to give you an idea of what that means, here is the map. This is the Holy Land here, and you can see it's just kind of there. there really is no capital city or anything, because the judges just ruled from wherever they were at. So basically, you're talking about moving from here all the way around to here. That is the kingdom of Moab. Now, in order to get through that, you have to get through the kingdom of Edom. Notice it says Esau. Who's Esau?
Jacob and Esau,
Yeah, well, who are they?
brothers.
Yeah, well, what happened to them?
They split, they divided their,
Well,
They
not
didn't
exactly.
divide, there was an argument.
right, but they, their birthright,
Yeah, but so who stole the birthright? Which one of them?
Esau. And, no, Esau's birthright was taken from his brother for,
Yeah, so basically, that was the birthright Esau was supposed to have.
right.
That's what he ended up with. So you get to go through an area that wasn't too friendly to get to another area that wasn't even less friendly. So basically, that's what Naomi and her husband, whose name, and I'm going to ask you to say it, you did it so well, was Amalek. So they went to here, and they had 2 sons. Now, again, since he's such an expert on names, I won't ask him, but they had 2 sons.
Mahlon and Kilian.
Yeah, Mahlon and Kilian.
Yeah,
So
I
in
remember
each one of them,
See?
each one of them married women from here. So they were not Jewish. One was Orpah, and the other was Ruth. So you have 2 generations of this family living together. You had Naomi and Amalek, and the 2 sons and the 2 daughters-in-law. Well, the worst thing that could happen in a situation like this is to have all the men die. Well, you had 3 of them. What's the odds? Actually, in this case, pretty good. Because both the sons died first. And then Naomi's husband died. So the 3 of them were widows at the same time. Now, do you remember what the rule was if that should happen? We talked about it last week. Who are these 2 young women supposed to marry?
They have to marry somebody else.
Well, they had to, first of all, they had to marry a specific person. And that was another son.
But there wasn't another son.
That's right. And so what did Naomi say about that?
Go home.
She said they could go home.
Go home.
Go back home.
Right, yeah, but she also said something else. I'm a little too old for this sort of thing. And not only am I a little too old for this sort of thing, but what else?
You can go home.
No, she said, even if I had 2 sons within a year and a half right now, you'd have to wait 20 years before you could marry them. So, because of that, she said,
You can go home.
you can go home. She says, I'm going back to here. My family still has land there, I think. But you 2 stay here. You're going to have a much better chance of finding a husband here than you ever would here. So, from last week, what happened?
The Oprah lady, she went home.
Yeah, she stayed here.
Yeah, she'd stay.
And then what happened to Ruth?
She went with Naomi.
Yeah, so Ruth and Naomi are now back here. Orpah is back here, and we don't hear about her again. I tried to find out for you, but I couldn't find out anything
You
about
don't
it.
hear anything else would happen to her?
No, I got to go into the real deep dark basement to find that out, I guess. But the point of the matter is that that in itself is a story right there, and the story should have could have ended right there. But the point of the matter of this whole book is what occurs after all of this happens. As I said, normally, according to Jewish law, you had to marry another, and any other son should have married 1 or 2 of them. And that was the law. And why would it have to be another son? We talk about that too.
Carry on the line.
Carry on the line, exactly. They had to carry on the line. That was the number one priority.
Yeah.
So where we're at is now Naomi and Ruth are here, living probably on Naomi's family's land somewhere, with no means of support. Okay, there was no social security or welfare or anything along those lines in those days. All you had was in Leviticus, and what did Leviticus say they could do?
What are you asking me?
Well, you were the only one, you two were the only two
I
here.
don't remember from yesterday, what are you talking
Had to
about?
support it.
Yeah, but how? What was it that those two women were allowed to do?
Pick up that wheat
Pick
stuff.
up the grain.
Yeah, the green stuff.
So that's where we are. They, Ruth and every once in a while Naomi are following the harvesters and are allowed to pick up, stuff off the ground. So let's start with Ruth chapter 2 verses 1 to 7. These two read enough last week, so one of the four of you can do it.
I can start.
Yeah.
Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" The overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter.
Okay. So she announces that this is what she is going to do. Do you think Boaz was targeted?
Initially, probably not, but
Yes.
she knew he wasn't just a relative.
Not a relative necessarily, her husband's relative is what this is.
Well,
Yeah, that's right.
It wasn't her relative.
It was the closest thing to a relative that they could find.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we read last week in Leviticus, it specifically says that if you have widows or the alien, which would be an outsider, that they will be allowed to follow the harvesters and pick up whatever they leave behind. Now, considering that this was a time when they had basically nothing, they had to pick up enough stuff to feed themselves and maybe to sell a little bit on the side to maintain any kind of a lifestyle at all. So stop and think of how much had to be left. They had to really work hard to find enough left behind to make that happen. Now, supposedly, when you glean, it's supposed to be because the harvesters do the best they can. They can't find everything. So that's only supposed to be a little bit sitting out there. Okay, you understand that?
Mm-hmm.
Now, we find a little bit of a difference of opinion here. Would somebody like to read verses 8 to 16?
I can read. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls and watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." And at this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes, that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I have been told all about you, and have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you have left your father and mother and your homeland and come to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord, she said. You have given me comfort and have spoken kindly to your servant. Though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls. In mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here, have some bread and dip it in wine vinegar. When she sat down with the harvesters, she offered her some roasted grain. She ate all that she wanted and had some left over, and she got up to glean. Boaz gave orders to his men, even if she gathers among the sheaves, don't embarrass her. Rather pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her.
Aha! Remember, the idea was that all that they were required to do was let them follow along. We see a little bit of a different story here. First of all, I don't know what Ruth looked like, but maybe that had something to do with it. He said after all, it said he noticed her. Second of all, notice it says that he recognized that she was a foreigner.
And he already knew her story, so somebody
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
told him
Yeah.
about
Oh,
her.
that, yeah, we read last week that, when Naomi got to town, word got around as to who she was. And remember, her family was still there. Might have been distant relatives, but they were still there. The reason this is significant is because what happens if a Jewish man touches a Gentile?
Not good.
Uh,
They're unclean.
yeah, they're unclean. They got to go through all of
The
these
ritual.
and everything else. And this is years before. And they're taking care of a foreigner. That was very, very unusual. Very unusual. And notice he refers to God blessing her and whatever else. She's a Moabite. She's not one of the God's chosen people. But he's treating her like one. When you read a book of the Bible, you have to ask yourself, why, when we talked about the canon, why did they include this book as part of the canon? And why is it set up right between Judges and 1 Samuel when the kings start? That's an awful interesting place to put it. Because they're telling you a message here. And the message they're telling you is that here is this guy who has no obligation whatsoever to take care of this woman. No obligation at all. Other than related to Naomi, and Naomi's a distant relative. That's as far as it got. And yet, look at what he just said. Not only that, what does he tell the harvesters to do?
Be nice to her, be polite.
Start her extra
Give her
butter.
extra stuff.
Yeah, don't touch her. In other words, none of this hanky-panky to get more stuff here, which I presume was going on. I mean, it was probably likely. So the fact that it that it was put in there in those words means it was likely going on. So so now here's Boaz, who up until this point had no idea who this woman was, other than what he hears in the marketplace.
Well, how did he have the authority to tell these harvesters what to do?
They work for him. It's his
It's
land.
his field.
It's his field. Okay, that's so you gotta make sure you tell the people that cut your lawn on the side of the hill. Make sure that, we gotta get some Boy Scouts up there to glean the, no, no, it's his field. And, basically that's the way it works, and he's probably hired these guys. They're hired hands, and, if you recall, there are other stories in the Bible where you know, you go to the marketplace every morning and you hire you, and you work, you do my field today. Well, that's what he's telling them. Now, notice what she says. She gets to walk behind in the hot sun and pick up whatever they leave behind. And what does she say?
She blesses him.
Yeah, she said, how did I get to be so lucky? Read it. It says this. How did I get to be... This is considered lucky. This kind of life is considered lucky. Can you imagine what everybody else was getting? I mean, she got a piece of bread and a little bit of dip in it for lunch. She was told, you know, all the guys were told to keep their hands off of her. And she considers this lucky, a lucky way to live. And now Naomi at the same time, we find out, also would help out from time to time, but not every day. So this is considered a good lifestyle for a woman who was a widow. And the fact that he's doing that with a foreigner is even more, you know, amazing, if you want to call it that. Okay, now who wants to read verses 17 to 23?
I'll read it. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. How do you pronounce it? She carried it back to town, and her mother saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz, she said. The Lord bless him, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. She added, that man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsmen redeemers. How far?
23.
23.
Then Ruth, how do you pronounce it? Moabitess?
Moabite.
Moabitess said, he even said to me, stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it will be good for you, my daughter, to go with his girls, because in someone else's field you might be harmed. So Ruth stayed close to the serving girls of Boaz to glean until the barley and the wheat harvest were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law.
Okay. So Naomi suspects something here. But she also recognizes that even though the relationship may, you know, the lineage may be a little bit, you know, weak, the fact that her, you know, Boaz has recognized this and has put it to work. Now, the term was kinsman redeemer. Okay, that's the word you use. That also was part of the early Torah. Each family was supposed to, you know, care for each other, and there was going to be this kinsman redeemer, okay, who would come in and take care of situations when things like this would come up. And now Boaz technically didn't really have to do that, but he did it anyway. Some say that the reason this book was added was because it also points out that at some point, Jesus Christ will be our kinsman redeemer.
Can I read this one paragraph down here that explains it?
Mm-hmm.
The guardian redeemer, traditionally called a kinsman redeemer, was a near relative who was responsible for protecting the interest of needy members of the extended family. For example, his role might be to provide an heir for a brother who had died, to redeem land that a poor relative had sold outside the family, to redeem a relative who had been sold into slavery, or to avenge the killing of a relative.
So, that's what, like I said, notice it said close relative. He wasn't that close, but he took the role anyway. Now, what motivated him to do that? The scholars, the way the book is written, it's because he was a follower of God and felt it was the right thing to do. Okay? As opposed to the law says I gotta.
No, but he couldn't have been motivated by the fact that he could get more property too.
Well, yeah, I don't know how much land Naomi's family owned, but from reading the accounts, it wasn't all that much. But the fact was, if you own land and you can't harvest it, it doesn't do you much good. And that was the situation they were in. So here Boaz is going way out of his way to care for this foreigner. Okay? Now, I don't know what was going on around town, but I imagine there were a few people talking like this. Think about it. I told you there was animosity between the Moabites and the Israelites. They didn't like each other. And yet, he's going out of his way to fill a role that technically that the law says he doesn't have to fill unless he wants to. So keep that in mind as we move forward here. This is something that again is going to go through the book. Remember, the book is divided into two parts. Ruth's love is demonstrated. And now we're getting into this one. Ruth's love is going to be rewarded. So keep in mind that now we're moving into phase 2 of the book. So now let's finish out. Let's see. We finished out chapter 2, didn't we?
Yep.
Okay. So the next chapter talks about. How do I want to put this? It talks about Naomi deciding that maybe if I grease the skids a little bit, this can really turn into something. So why doesn't I'd like somebody to read the chapter 3, the first 10 verses.
I'll go. You want through 10?
Mm-hmm.
One day Naomi and her mother-in-law said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you? Where will you be provided for? It is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself, and put your best clothes on. Then go down on the threshing floor. But don't let him know you're there until you have finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down on the fair end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men whether rich or poor.
Aha! What does this sound like to you?
Sounds like they're fooling around.
Aha! I mean, let's face it, that's the way things worked in those days. How do you get noticed? Well, Naomi's a little sharp cookie here.
Matchmaker.
That's a good word.
No.
That's a good word. She sees that maybe there's a little electricity here. Now, what does she tell her to do?
Lay down and
All I see.
Well,
Perfume up.
perfume up and then do. Well, then
Doll
how-
up.
and then dress up your best clothes. You know, you're going to go to the threshing floor. Now, stop and think about this. It says, you're going to. The threshing floor is located in a public place. The animals would trample the husks in order to separate the grain. Then the mixture would be tossed in the air so the wind would blow away the chaff. Boaz had to stay the night to guard his grain from thieves. You're dressed in perfume and everything else, and they're throwing stuff in the air, and it's getting blown around, and not exactly the prom.
What it says here is Naomi's advice to Ruth is clearly for the purpose of appealing to Boaz's guardian redeemer obligation. Tamar, the mother of Perez, had also laid claim to the provision of the Levirate or guardian redeemer law in Genesis.
Yeah. So basically, she's counting on Naomi's counting on the fact that he's going to be the kinsman and redeemer. So I'm going to make sure that this process speeds up a little bit.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth was not Jewish.
Right.
If she had have been a Jew, did Naomi encourage her partially because she wasn't Jewish? Meaning, if Ruth was a Jewish girl, she wouldn't have told her to do this.
I'm not sure what she would have done.
I mean, because
However,
Jewish women are supposed to be modest and all that stuff. I don't
yeah. Well, actually, when you're in desperate straits, you do desperate things, and that's recall how she'd been living. She'd been spending her whole day walking around behind a whole bunch of other people just to stay alive. Eventually, that's got to catch up with you. Now if Ruth had been Jewish, Boaz would have had no second thoughts whatsoever to do what he did. But now, what it doesn't say that, but if you read the book carefully, you will find that she accepts the Jewish faith. Okay, Ruth accepts the Jewish faith and starts acting as if, the words she uses, the way she talks to him, all of those things say that she now understands who the God of Israel is and is worshiping and accepting that God, and given up on all the other gods she had when she was growing up. Now, I was going to wonder how many of you took my advice and rented the story of Ruth and watched it, but I guess none of you. My mother made me watch that movie when I was a kid. There is such a thing, and one of the things that they had in the movie, and I don't know where they got it from, was that Ruth was trying to become a temple priestess originally for some other god. And nowhere does it say that in the Bible, so I don't know where the movie maker got that from. But she was rejected because of a blemish on her neck. So, be that as it may. So that's what the threshing floor was. So basically Boaz had to be there not to do the work, but to make sure nobody stole his stuff. And I'm sure that there's a bunch of other guys doing exactly what he's doing. Because each grain is in a pile, and each guy is protecting his own pile. So this was not a private moment we're talking about here. This was in plain view of everybody. At least the other people who were threshing the grain. So this was a pretty much an outward expression. All right, so now the people in town, I mean, you know, this is the kind of thing that soap operas are made out of, you know. But in all seriousness, this is what is leading to the important part of the story here. Ruth made the first. Ruth, in essence, is making the first bold move. And like you said, well, you know, would a Jewish woman have done that? Well, if it came to surviving, maybe. But the way she explains it in the message, it says, "I am Ruth, your maiden. Take me under your protecting wing. You are my close relative, you know, in the circle of covenant redeemers. You have the right to marry me." We're going to see how that comes into play now. So that comes in. So why does somebody read from verse 11 to the end of the chapter?
And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem, good, let him redeem. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "Don't let it be known that a woman came to the thrashing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed." Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today."
Well, you think maybe there's a building connection here? 6 measures of grain is an awful lot of grain. So basically, what he's saying is, the rest of you guys, don't talk about this. As we recall from last week, Boaz was one of the respected men of the town. Okay, so pretty much he had the power to tell the others, "Hey, get in line or else," and they would listen. So basically, here is where things are going to get interesting. So all of this involves the kinsman redeemer. Notice what else did you say? That there was another one?
Yeah, that, it said Tamar had done it before. Let me see. Tamar, the mother of Perez, had also laid claim to the provision of the levirate, or guardian redeemer law in Genesis.
So, basically there's another one out there. And we're going to find out what happens to the other one and where this story goes. Actually, any of you ever read Pride and Prejudice?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same story. Remember she was pledged to one person, then something happened, and he had the next guy in line. She had to take the next guy in line, and he was sort of a dork. And but that's what's happening here. You've got a situation where even he recognizes, hey, I'm not number one. But if this other guy doesn't do it, contact me and we'll figure something out. So at this point, he has mentioned how many times now that she is a foreigner? At least, 3? So he knows what he's getting into. Okay? So does the other kinsman redeemer, I presume. And the fact that all this is happening in a very small town, in open areas and everything, in places where everybody can see, it tells you that the rest of the town has to be aware of it. And so we'll leave it at this point today. By the way, what was the name of the town? When we keep talking about where they're living and everything, what was the name of the town? Bethlehem. We have heard that name before, haven't we? You will find that when we get to the end of this book, the real reason why they included it has to do with the town of Bethlehem itself, among other things.
When they listed what's the name at the end, is that also part of the lineage of Christ?
You're getting ahead of yourself, but yes. So basically, what we're going to find out is that, first of all, Boaz is descended from, do you recall in Joshua, the 2 spies?
There were 7.
And who helped them?
Yeah.
Who helped them?
Jacob?
Yeah, Rahab.
Rahab.
Boaz is descended from Rahab, who is a foreigner, and he marries a foreigner, which is going to matter in this whole story. But that's a story for another day. Thank you for coming today. Last week we had a little bit of fun, but there was only 2 people.